Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera. Alright, inshallah today I'm going to discuss about Marxism in education. Actually I'm trying to find the simplest and easiest explanations in terms of Marxism so that we could benefit from the literature or from the discussion. Most of the text that I found on the internet, it has a very complicated languages, a sentence structure, and the easiest so far I found is this one. It's written by this Douglas Kellner. Alright, and if I'm not mistaken, he's a faculty, he's a lecturer in this UCLA University. Alright, so the title of this article is Marxian Perspective on Education Philosophy from Classical Marxism to Critical Pedagogy. Alright, so we are going to look into this article deeper, and we are going to read it together so that we could make sense of what is Marxism and how does it related to education, and how does Marxism actually related to critical pedagogy. Okay, when uh, when something's mentioned about the critical pedagogy, okay, I remember that it has some connection with our course syllabus. Okay, let me check our course syllabus first, right? Okay, this is our course syllabus. Okay, if you could take a look at week 11, Marxism and Education. It mentioned about the aims of education, method of education, curriculum, role of the teacher, critique of Marxism in education. However, it does not mention about the critical pedagogy that I mentioned just now. Okay. Alright. Supposedly it has. I could explain that. I could tell that Marxism and critical pedagogy actually has some relation into it. Critical pedagogy, it is developed by Paulo Freire, and it is famous with a method of banking or banking method of education. Okay, I'll show you what is it. Alright, don't worry. Okay, this is the guy, Paulo Freire. Okay, let's look into that so that we could read more about him. For your information, this lecture is specifically on Marxism, but because it has some connections, let us read. Alright. Okay, Paulo Regulus Neves Freire, 1921, 1997, was a Brazilian educator and philosopher who was leading advocate of critical pedagogy. Alright. Critical pedagogy is a philosophy of education and social movement that developed and applied concepts from critical theory and related tradition to the field of education and the study of culture. So the main important things that you need to look at this is a critical theory. Critical theory mostly came from ideas. Ideas comes from Marxist thinking, right? A little bit on that, okay. And then when I was doing my degree, I used to read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, okay. We will read more. We will read more. Okay, maybe this is the first time that you heard about this guy. And then I did mention about the banking model of education just now. All right, let's look into that. Okay. All right. Okay, this is it. Okay, pedagogy. First one. All right. Paulo Freire contributed a philosophy of education which blended classical approaches stemming from Plato, lots of thinking, okay, critical thinking on that, and modern Marxist, post-Marxist, and anti-colonialist thinker. Alright? His Pedagogy of the Oppressed can be read as an extension of or reply to Franz Fanon's The Wretch of the Earth. Franz Fanon actually mentions lots of this anti-colonialism and fighting with French as a colonizer in Algeria, if I'm not mistaken. Right? And which emphasized the need to provide native population with an education which was simultaneously new and modern rather than traditional and anti-colonial. not simply an extension of the colonizing culture. Lots of educations nowadays that we receive is just repetitions of the traditional education system, which actually do not change the people. All right. So, Freire considered the contemporaneous Chinese cultural revolutions. Okay, this is very related to Marxism, communists, an exemplar of his notion of cultural action, and praised Mao Zedong innovation to Marxist theory and praxis. In the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Freire reprising the oppressor's distinctions, applies the distinctions to education, championing that education should allow the oppressed to regain their sense of humanity, in turn overcoming their conditions. Okay, so education should not be a manipulation that the oppressor, the colonizer, will take more from us. It should be a tool to actually free human minds rather than we subjugate to the notions of colonizing or colonizer. Nevertheless, he acknowledged from that for this to occur, the oppressed individual must play a role in their liberation. See, pembebasan. You understand that? Okay. So in the banking education, it's more like we learn at the end of the day during the exam, we just actually vomiting out again. So that's why it mentioned that which students are viewed as empty accounts to be filled with informations. And we think that by filling the students with lots of informations and during the exam we actually vomit it out, letting out everything is good. It does not have a critical elements of critical thinking or what Paulo Freire believed as a critical pedagogy. Okay? Alright, so if you're interested with his work, you can actually find his book, right? Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I already read that. It's very interesting. And you can actually get it for free if I'm not mistaken. And then the recent one is a Pedagogy of the Hope, Reliving Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Okay, or you can actually go to the YouTube. Okay, let me check. Okay, if you're interested, okay, you can go into this academia.edu by Dr. D. Campbell. All right, he actually has his own YouTube videos that actually explain chapter by chapter, and then you can listen to his explanation. I think this is very good. So you can listen more. I suggest that you have the book first. You read it, then and then you find this Dr. Campbell YouTube videos, and then try to check your understanding with what he actually outlined and prepared. Okay. Okay. All right. I don't want to go further into this, all right, because we have so many things that we need to discuss. So, coming back to this paper, to this article, it mentions that the theory associated with Marxism was developed in mid-19th century Europe by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Although Marx and Engels don't write widely about education, they developed theoretical perspective on modern societies that have been used to highlight the social functions of education, and their concepts and methods have served to both theorize and criticize educations in the reproductions of capitalist societies. Okay, so Marxism tend to actually criticize a lot of things related to capitalist society. Among the criticism on the capitalist society is that they tend they actually believe education actually based on its own meritocracy tend to subjugate people or humans, because the one that benefits from good education is not all, it's not everyone, and it's not even according to the meritocracy, because only the people who has who has the capitals, who has the money, who has the power, actually can benefit the best education system that they have. or for example, they could go to the best schools or send their kids to the best universities and top 10 or top 7 universities, and these universities actually their kids actually later on will have a lot of network, and this network actually access them to a good salary or good positions in the government or private sector. Okay, this is among what they say. Somehow, what the authors wrote actually does make sense. Okay, it seems to be true. It does make sense. It's not. It seems. It is true, right? That is what's happening. If you read this from the revisedsociology.com, the Marxist perspective on education, according to traditional Marxist, school teaches children to passively obey authority. So this is different than this critical pedagogy, where critical pedagogy actually always asking critical questions on about the authority. Okay, but for the normal schooling, you actually have to follow the rules, you have to obey authority, and then it will produce an legitimate class inequality. Because by obeying the authority, and the authority is being held by certain people in power, and they benefit the most from it. And of course, not everyone can be the leaders and the one that controls everything. All right. So let us read more on this website. Traditional Marxist education system as working in the interest of ruling class elites. According to the Marxist perspective on education, the system performs three functions for these elites. It reproduces class inequality. Okay. It legitimates class inequality. There should be a class inequality. For example, there are a bourgeois group and there are proletariat, and these two groups actually always in disagreement between each other, and it works in the interest of capitalist employers. Okay, all right. So you can see this the whole they give you a kind of framework there, so that you can understand the Marxist perspective on education. All right. So it says that middle class parents use their material and cultural capital to ensure that their children get into the best schools and the top sets. This means that the wealthier students tend to get the best education and then go out onto to get the middle class job. Meanwhile, working class children are more likely to get a poorer standard of education because the parents could not afford to send the kids to a good school and end up in working class job. In this way, class inequality is reproduced. Okay, and then the wealthy students tend to be brighter, tend to be smarter, because they have access to the tuition classes, they have access to the computer, they have access to the technology, to the latest book, compared to the working class students, all right, whose parents are poor and do not have lots of money. They depend so much on free stuff, and they don't have money to buy all sort of things that I mentioned just now, right? Okay, coming back to this article, so from this, the Marxian perspective then, they develop a critical Frankfurt School critical theory. Critical theory then produce critical pedagogy or critical literacy, this kind of stuff. All right. Okay. I'll show you what is important. Okay. And then perhaps the rest of the reading you can do on your own. If you don't understand, you could ask me actually. Alright, during our Google Meet classroom. Okay, so when Marx and Engels actually produce this Marxism philosophy or theory, alright, this actually capture my interest. Okay, you can read it here. Terrible poverty prevails among the lower classes, particularly the factory workers in Wuppertal. Syphilis and lung diseases are so widespread as to be barely credible. Syphilis, this syphilis is related to the sexual thing diseases and lung diseases because they don't have money and they don't have educations, so they are actually they are not protected from this kind of stuff, because when you don't have education, you tend to do, you know, many what I call it as something that is immoral. Okay, right? And then out of 2,500 children of school age, 1,200 are deprived of educations and grow up in the factories, okay, merely so that the manufacturer need not to pay the adults, basically the capitalists or the manufacturer, the owner of the factories, take advantage on this kind of working class, because they don't have money, they don't have education, they have to work in order to survive, and then they are exposed to this kind of lung diseases and syphilis. All right. So because of that, when they observe this, they realize this, and then they came up together, and then they came up with a theory about the Marxist philosophy. All right. And then the young Marx, okay, and Engels thus perceived that without education, the working class was condemned to live of drudgery and death, but that with education they had a chance to create a better life. But still, it is under a control of uh, a manufacturer or the capitalists. All right. So so they they actually care, you could see that here, into the impoverished situation of the proletariat, and would thus produce a unified working class, at least one with interest in common, okay, to fight for their rights. Okay, they declared that the bourgeois class is constantly battling against the older feudal powers among its own segments, and against the foreign bourgeois, and thus enlist the proletariat as its ally. Alright. And then they use the educations, okay, to fight the ruling class, actually, to be very critical in this modern sense. Nowadays, there's no more war. It's more on to fight and to argue for the lower class, for the working class, okay, to give them necessary rights. Okay, so the famous books of Marxism, they call it a manifesto. Okay, you can get it from the internet. I don't think it's allowed in Malaysia. I'm not sure though. Maybe you can get it from books, from the shop books, but I'm not sure. Right? Okay. Mm, uh, we can actually find important points that we could discuss. Okay, this is very interesting. Thus, in Marx's utopian visions of communism, education would help fully develop socialized individual, create a cooperative and harmonious society, because everyone is fighting for their own rights. Okay, they want to make sure that it is fair. Okay, no one should get more than what is supposed to get. Okay, and unleash creativity in all its forms. Even though, to me, that's kind of impossible. All right, because actually, when it comes to Marxism's, humans has its own needs, and our own needs actually are not the same. And that actually, to me, that's how I see it. Okay, because I disagree with Marxism into some certain extent. Right. Um. Okay, this is another important paragraph as well. Okay, that maybe you would like to, I would like to highlight it. Um, After World War II, the critical theories, okay, examine how the state and public education produce a form of half Bildung, half education, and themselves call for education that fully develop individual subjectivities. Okay, alright. So education is not just for the purpose of producing a robot like banking education that we mentioned just now. Okay, their form of critical theory emphasizes the importance of critique, reflexivity, and gaining emancipatory consciousness without being subjugated into some kind of indoctrination. So that's why they see religion as something that they are against, because they see religion as indoctrination. Okay, but Islam is not really subjugate our mind. Islam actually free our minds, let our minds to to be very to actually go into the fullest potential as human being. Except that we believe in we are the slave of Allah, but we cannot enslave humanity. We cannot enslave another human. We cannot make human into slavery. We are slave of Allah. So to me, that's enough. All right. So, and then free from but for critical theories, there is no such thing as that. To them, it's free is totally free. All right. Uh, And then, although the Frankfurt School did not systematically explore the institutions of education, Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse, and Habermas wrote occasional critiques of the universities and intervened frequently in educational debates. Okay, this is the name of the philosopher in critical theory. The famous one is Habermas. All right. If you go and check on the internet about Habermas on the YouTube, you will see lots of his books written about the critical theory and critics, how the universities is basically another system of a capitalist that are producing, that works for the economy but do not work for humans, do not work for overall humans. It's more on the specific uh, controlling or controlling classes. Okay. um okay. Okay, if you look into this paragraph, you will see what Paulo Freire and the critical pedagogy produce this kind of a thinking. Alongside of the proliferation of the new Marxist theories of culture and society and the globalization of cultural studies, forms of an oppositional critical pedagogy emerged that explicitly criticize schooling in capitalist society. Because I already mentioned that capitalist society actually do not free you. Actually, it subjugate you into its own mode of controlling, while calling for more emancipatory modes of education. Alright, so that's why I mentioned about the banking concept of education. At the end of the day, you just vomiting out whatever that you understand during the exam, and to them, education must be interactive, dialogical. You can question lots of stuff, which I tend to agree with this kind of techniques and ideas as well, and participatory forms of pedagogy that are parallel in interesting ways of those of John Dewey. Alright? While Dewey wanted education to produce citizens for democracy, however, Freire sought in the spirit of Marxist revolutionary praxis to develop pedagogy of the oppressed that would produce revolutionary subjects empowered to overthrow oppressions and to create a more democratic and just social order. Certain country, they don't like this book. They don't like this kind of idea because you tend to be revolutionary and questions everything about education system, about life, about economy. Okay. Well, these are the things among the Marxisms and educations and how does it affect. Okay. Um, if you have more questions, okay, you can read more. Okay. Feel free to come and see me to discuss about this. Okay. With that, let's finish our class with the Tasbih Kifara and Surah Al-Asr. Okay, thank you very much.